Good morning, everyone. I welcome all the participants who have joined us on this webinar hosted by Think India in collaboration with the Center of Criminal Justice Administration. We at Think India have felt the need to bind the students with an Indian nationalistic string to harness this part of the national treasure in furthering our aim of national reconstruction. Students from IIC, IIMB, various NLUs have joined together to create this forum for the students across various institutions in India. The Center for Criminal Justice Administration at Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia National Law University. Its aim is to promote students and researchers' interest and influence in the academic discipline and practical application of criminal law. I would like to introduce you all to the woman of our hour, quite literally, Madam Aishwarya Bhati. She has been practicing in the Supreme Court since 1998. She has been active in the bar also. She was elected as the Secretary of the Supreme Court Bar Association in 2013 to 14 and 2014 to 15. She is the first woman from the state of Rajasthan to have become the senior advocate at the Supreme Court of India in the year 2019. She is currently the Additional Solicitor General of India. In the course of her legal career, one case that has become her signature is the case in which she represented 45 serving women officers in the army in the landmark judgment of the Supreme Court, which paved the way for the permanent commission of women in the army. We also have with us Shri Ganesh ji from Think India, along with Shashank Singh, who is in charge of Think India Delhi. Now, without any further ado, I now request Aishwarya ma'am to kindly take the discussion forward and enlighten us about the issue at hand, which is prevention of sexual harassment and concept of work from home. I also invite all the participants to kindly leave their questions for ma'am in the live chat, which she would be addressing after her first address. Ma'am.
Thank you very much, Dhamanji. Very warm good morning to all of you. Ganeshji can't see you, but Dhamanji says you are here. So greetings.
Namaste. I'm,
Ji, namaste. So it's wonderful to start your morning with the students, and I must confess that when Shashank told me to join this, I had obviously in principle agreed, but I didn't realize that I gave time which would coincide with my court timing, and then he gave me a time of 11, so it was not working for me. So I requested him to prepone it. That's how I'm starting my day with you this morning, 10 o'clock, and then of course I rush into the court. It's always a privilege for me to have an interaction with law students, and so I'm going to give you some thoughts about the topic that is assigned to me, some legal provisions, and my analysis and my thoughts on how I understand and perceive it to be. But I would expect a longer interaction with all of you. So please keep your thoughts, your comments, your questions, or your any remarks that you may have ready, and we'll have it towards the end of the session. So what is assigned to me is in the change scenario where workplaces have changed. We are increasingly more and more people are working from home across different geographies, across different jurisdictions, across different mediums. Virtual work has become the order of the day. How has this impacted sexual harassment of women at workplace? We have seen that, by and large, sexual harassment in domestic relationships has been a loud cry during the lockdown periods, and it has sort of gathered the attention of the policymakers, the lawmakers, the enforcers, and the intellectuals who discuss issues which the society is grappling with. What you have assigned to me today is another aspect of that sexual harassment of women, and that aspect is workplace of women and the changing dimensions of workplace. So first, let me give you some basic background of the sexual harassment law. as you all know, Vishakha's judgment was the precursor to this law having come into force. Vishakha was a Sathin from my state, hailing from Rajasthan. She was gang raped by multiple men of upper caste household, where she, in her capacity working as a Sathin, she had tried to curb child marriages that were happening in that household, and she was repaid back, so to speak, by gang rape. And that was the a shocking case that actually got the Supreme Court's attention to the abysmal level of sexual harassment that women face at their workplaces. And that is how we saw the Supreme Court actually turning the leaf. It was a milestone. Vishakha's judgment, 1996, this judgment came. Justice J.S. Verma was the author of this judgment, and it was a turning point in many ways, because in normal course of events, the Supreme Court does not lay down law. It is not the Supreme Court's jurisdiction or its domain to lay down law. It is for the legislature to lay down the law, and Supreme Court, when it is questioned in the court, then they decide on the validity of that law on the constitutional parameters, and then they come to a finding whether that law meets the test of constitutionality or it fails the test of constitutionality. But they leave it at that. It's never that this is unconstitutional, but you should have this law. That is never the case. At the most, sometimes you hear, they are like obiter dictas from the court, which are suggestions or advisories from the court that, for example, Uniform Civil Code has not happened despite 74 years of independence. So that is so occasionally we hear cautions like that from the Supreme Court. Or the recent cautions on the 10th schedule, the anti-defection laws, that is the hottest topic right now. But there also the court has been cautioning that we need to have this whole mechanism and the exercise of anti-defection rights being exercised by an impartial authority and not speaker, because other disqualifications under the Constitution are exercised by the president on the aid and advice of the election commission. An election commission is a constitutional authority with a fixed tenure, with other safeguards. Anyways, I've taken you a little far away. Those are but still arbiters. But in Vishakha's judgment, the Supreme Court said that there is no law to curb sexual harassment of women at workplace, and the Supreme Court refused to be the mute spectator to continuing this, and they said that till the time law is framed by the Parliament, we are going to lay down guidelines. Until the time the law comes into force, these guidelines will have the force of law. And those guidelines were laid down in that judgment in 1996. Of course, it took a good 16 years for the Parliament to lay down law on this, and the law actually came only in 2013. The law is the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013. With this background, I want to take you straight to the definitions of what sexual harassment means. Section 2 is usually you will find all definitions in most acts. Section 2 is the section of definitions. So here also the definitions are in Section 2 of this act. The aggrieved woman is defined, appropriate government is defined, domestic worker, chairperson, etc. But what I want to draw your attention is to the definition of sexual harassment, which is at page 2N, section 2N of this act, which says sexual harassment includes. Now, see, this is an inclusive definition. It is not an exhaustive definition. So it says sexual harassment includes any one or more of the following unwelcome acts or behavior, then whether directly or by implication. Let's break it. First thing is, this definition, it is an inclusive definition. So it can't be said that this is exhaustive, and this alone is what sexual harassment is. The legislators have been very cautious in giving a definition which is an inclusive definition, being cognizant of the fact that there could be more actions and behaviors which could form, which would or which could form a unwelcome sexual harassment act, and therefore the definition has been kept to be inclusive and not exhaustive definition. Then taking it further, any one or more of the following unwelcome acts or behavior. So now what is there? The act or behavior. It covers both things. It's not necessary that you say, oh, it's not, this is this particular thing that is being alleged as a sexual harassment. I've not really done it in a overt manner, or it's not an action that I have done. So action and behavior, they are both covered. And what is important is it should be unwelcome. See, we are talking about workplace. Here are people who are acting as colleagues. They are working as colleagues. So there may be many occasions where physical contact, etc., is necessary. For people to have these interactions is necessary. I mean, it's part of everyday functioning in the workplaces. But when it is unwelcome act and behavior, and what kind? Now let's see further. So this comes from the first part. Now what is defined further is physical contact and advances. You have to bear in mind that it has to be unwelcome. And also one more thing that I've missed is whether directly or by implication. So this also section 2N very categorically says that sexual harassment could be direct, overt, apparent, ostensible act, or it could be a covert, in wraps kind of a act, which is by implication, where you are actually making a sexually colored remark, where the remark in the literal form does not actually mean imply anything sexual, but when you understand the impact of it or the effect of it, then you realize that by implication the person is actually implying this. This was one of the arguments we made in the naval judgment. Dhamanji mentioned my case of the army women officers, where we succeeded in the battle for. It was a privilege to appear for those amazing women, and in that the army case came first in February, and that is called Women of India versus Babita Punia. And soon thereafter, the naval judgment came, and the naval judgment was slightly different in that there was no Navy was claiming that we don't have we don't have gender discrimination overtly, because we don't allow either our gentlemen officers or our women officers to migrate from short service commission to permanent commission. Therefore, it is not a Navy had allowed permanent commission in 2006, but this was for women prior to 2006. So they were saying we don't allow it even to our gentlemen officers, so there is no gender discrimination. There we use this argument of effect argument. There is something that is known as a facially neutral legislation. Now, facially neutral act, facially neutral legislation, facially neutral policy. Basically, facially neutral means that on the face of it appears to be neutral. But then you have to dig a little deeper. You dig a little deeper and you see the impact or the effect of that. And you realize that there is discrimination in the impact or effect of it. And our argument was that for gentlemen officers, Navy is taking this in a wrong manner, because after Babita Punia's judgment, it did not lie in their mouth to give all those stereotypical examples that they were giving in the Babita Punia judgment. So they found a novel way that, oh, we are not even doing gender discrimination. So then we had to show this to the court that this is a facially neutral action, apparently, but then you dig deeper and then you see that it is actually discriminatory, because gentlemen officers always had the option of either choosing permanent commission or choosing a short service commission, whereas women officers had this choice only from 2006 in Navy. So women who have been prior to 2006 have to be given this option. Anyways, it's history now. We succeeded in that also. That judgment is Union of India versus Annie Nagaraj. Same bench. That judgment came in March, soon after the holy break, just before the lockdown, actually. So here also, just to bring you back to the context, unwelcome acts or behaviors, whether they are direct or by implication, are very categorically covered in the definition of sexual harassment. And then what is defined, the five examples that are given, 5 instances that are given is, first, by physical contact and advances, or a demand or request for sexual favors, or making sexually colored remarks, or showing pornography, or any other unwelcome physical, verbal or non-verbal conduct of sexual nature. So you will see, I don't have to define this for you, but these are pretty simple to understand terms. But you will see that this is an inclusive definition, and this gives this itself, covers a wide variety from actual physical contact and advances to a demand for sexual favors, from making sexually colored remarks to showing pornography to, and then the last one is even more exhaustive, where it includes everything else. It says any other unwelcome physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of sexual nature. So the definition, despite definition not being an exhaustive definition, it is a very exhaustive definition, and it leaves the window open for any other unwelcome acts or behavior, whether directly or by implication. But then this itself covers so all the three aspects: physical, verbal, showing something in visual form, or even non-verbal. So when they say non-verbal, then it covers everything. I also want to show your attention, draw your attention to workplace. Workplace is defined in section 2O of this act, and it says that any department, organization, undertaking, establishment, enterprise, institution, office, branch, or unit which is established, owned, controlled, or wholly or substantially financed by funds provided directly or indirectly by appropriate government or local authority or a government company or a corporation or a cooperative society. So that is one aspect, everything in the government sector. Secondly, any private sector organization or private venture, undertaking, enterprise, institution, establishment, society, trust, NGO, unit, service provider, carrying on professional, commercial, vocational, educational, entertainmental, that's the word I'm hearing for the first time, entertainmental, industrial, health services, or financial activities, including production, supply, sale, distribution, or services. So all of this in private sector, which includes all educational trusts, NGOs, all bodies. So you see the definition is very exhaustive of the workplace. Then it includes hospitals, nursing homes, any sports institutions, stadiums, sports complexes, etc. Any place visited by employee arising out of or during the course of employment. Look at this definition. This is very, very interesting, part 5, where it says that any place visited by the employee arising out of or during the course of employment, including transportation by the employer for undertaking such journey, a dwelling place or a house. That is the 6th part. So 5th and 6th aspects of this are very interesting to note, that if a person with relation to the work that they are doing and they're visiting any other premises also with relation to that work, which also includes the transportation that the employer may provide, that also amounts to a workplace for within the parameters of the Sexual Harassment Act, and therefore it comes in this definition. I'm not going to take you further down this act. These two definitions were the most important things for the purpose of the topic that is assigned to me today. So now I want to give you some provisions of the IT Act also. The Information Technology Act has these sections, which are sections 65 to 78. These are also very interesting to note, because now a large part of our work is happening by virtual mediums, by different platforms. We are using our smartphones, our laptops, our tabs, iPads, etc., or PCs. So this is, taking the work to a completely virtual platform, a virtual medium, and therefore the cross-section of Sexual Harassment Act with the IT Act is something that we need to understand better. Now, essentially, the offenses in the IT Act are within these sections, which are sections 65 to 78. I'll just take you through, run you through it without taking you into exhaustive definitions, just to give you a flavor of the kind of offenses that are there. So 65 says tampering with computer source documents. 66 is hacking with computer systems. 66A, which was part of it, was quashed by the Supreme Court in the Shreya Singhals case. makes it punishable for sending offensive messages through Communication Service Information Technology Act. Section 66B is for punishment for dishonestly receiving stolen computer resource or communication device. 66C is punishment for theft, identity theft, sorry, punishment for identity theft, misuse of digital signatures. 66D is punishment for cheating by impersonation by using computer source. 66E is punishment for violation of privacy. 66F is punishment for cyber terrorism. 67 is publishing of information which is obscene in electronic form. 67A is punishment for publishing or transmitting material containing sexually explicit acts in electronic forms, etc. 67B is for transmitting material depicting children in sexually explicit acts, etc. 67C is preservation and retention of information by intermediaries. Intermediaries are those platforms which are where they are only holding that information. So this information, the content does not belong to them. But then the kind of world that we live in today, we all know that it is the world of the intermediaries. I mean, the largest the largest travel company in the world does not own a single hotel room. Airbnb, Oyo rooms, etc. The largest cab company in the world does not own a single cab. Uber, Ola, this is the way of the future. You know, the largest of the banks do not own any currency. They don't hold any currency. It is all in blockchains. So we live in very interesting times where the role of intermediaries is very, very important. So this section actually, brings that preservation and retention of information by intermediaries within the ambit of the IT Act. Section 68 is power of controller to give directions. And then I need not take you through the rest of them. I need not take you through the rest of them for the purpose of for understanding sexual harassment in the change scenario. Now, having given you a little background of the law that we are dealing with, the exhaustive definition of the sexual harassment in the 2013 Act and its interface with the IT Act. See, what is important for us to understand is that law follows life. When life is moving on virtual mediums, more and more life is going from a real medium to a virtual medium, where it's not just how we work, it's how we live is moved on to virtual world. And this transition has become even more emphatic during the COVID times. But this transition has been there for at least the last 2 decades. You know, increasingly our lives have gone more and more into the virtual world. And it's not just about how we work. Right now, work is getting all the focus, but how we have our relationships, how we meet people, how we greet people, how we are having our alliances, how we are ordering food, how we are doing commerce, how we are doing business, how we are doing our economic transactions, to how we are learning, how we are teaching, how we are sharing our knowledge and thoughts and ideas. Justice delivery system also is moving more and more. Of course, that push has come in the COVID time only, but the world is moving towards it, and it has been moving towards it for some time, for the last 2 decades for sure. I mean, before that also the progress was there, but for the last 2 decades, this has been a movement that has gone from strength to strength, and law has had to catch up. There is no option. Wherever life follows, the life dealings follow, life interactions follow, life disputes follow, law has to keep pace. Interestingly, if Elon Musk does succeed in taking all of us beyond space to other planets, who knows? Law will need to if life goes, life systems will go, life disputes will go, and law will have to keep pace. It will have to go with it. So just because the medium has changed does not mean that there is too much change to the fundamental law. What remains an offense in real world will continue to be an offense in the virtual world. Often we feel that, because when we are not face to face, there is a certain anonymity that comes, and we can have, screen names which are not our real names. We can post pictures of stars, we can hide our real pictures in our display pictures, and we can have, our favorite stars, or Hollywood, Bollywood, from the sports industry, our favorite animals, animated, anything. We can just about put anything to be our display picture or profile picture when we are operating on virtual mediums. So that often gives people a sense of anonymity, that it's the same recklessness, if I can use that word, that comes when people are part of the crowd, people are part of the mob, that you feel that you are not seen, you're not noticed, and therefore there is a veil, and therefore your actions are not being directly scrutinized, so you can get away with what you're doing. But that understanding cannot be further removed from the reality. In fact, it is such a big fallacy, because yes, of course, the virtual medium has its challenges, but the virtual medium has such solid digital footprints, which are extremely difficult for somebody to remove. It is actually easy to remove the footprints in the real world, and it is actually very, very difficult to remove those digital footprints in the virtual world. And therefore those digital footprints will always, it may take longer, these days the hackers and the miscreants are also becoming more and more ingenious, and if this kind of activity has to take place, I'm told that I'm not a techie, so I don't understand it fully, but I am told by my friends who are techies that it gets bounced by so many servers, and then it chooses, it uses as host a device which has low security, or a low level of protection available to it. So it may not even be using the actual device, but the signal from where which is the originating signal, can always still be found. And the law enforcement agencies are also not far behind. They are also using these young techies in the enforcement. And if you see a lot of enforcement agencies, especially with regard to the IT related offenses, are using the help of these young techies. It is necessary. You have to stay one step ahead of the hackers. And this is like a game. It's like, if you guys would have seen Tom and Jerry, that used to be a animation cartoon of our times, that we were all very fond of. I'm not sure if your generation sees Tom and Jerry with the same captivation, and with the same it used to enthrall us, it used to mesmerize us. But I often feel that in IT sector, in virtual spaces, the game is almost like cat and mouse. The Tom and Jerry game, where you're constantly in the tussle, because you have to always keep at it, you have to keep on improving your game, you have to keep your game dynamic. So that is happening. But coming back to the point of sexual harassment and working from home, so these offenses continue to be offenses. They are actionable. FIRs can be lodged under the IPC or in the economic wings division, which are there specifically for IT related offenses. In the NCR region and many other towns, I understand that now it is possible to lodge FIRs even online. You don't have to visit a local police thana to lodge an FIR. So it is possible. And after the Constitution Bench judgment of Lalita Kumari in 2015, they have made it mandatory for FIRs to be registered if the information discloses. Basically, what is the full form of FIR? First information report. So if the first information is disclosing the commission of a cognizable offense, then it is mandatory for the police authorities to register the FIR. And with the online registration of FIRs, it is easier to do that. I think it's important for us to understand that we should not be accepting or allowing this kind of behavior to go on, because it's often when we think that these are small instances and small, it's okay. It's not such a big thing. Why is she making such a big issue out of it? But the problem is that when you accept small behaviors which are aberrations, which are deviant behaviors, then you are making a foundation for more serious deviations to happen in the future. A stitch in time saves nine, and nipping in the bud is always the best remedy for this, because women are now equal stakeholders in the workplace. Not in the numbers that they exist, that women exist in the society, not as 50% stakeholders, but still as huge stakeholders in all workplaces. Even the so-called male bastions have been now broken by women being there in almost all male bastions and performing really shoulder to shoulder with their male counterparts. So there has to be zero tolerance for sexual harassment at workplaces. We can't allow that one half of our population has the problem of worrying about her safety, her her dignity, her individuality, her existence as a woman. uh, that cannot be a question mark. That cannot be a, a a cause of humor. That cannot be it cannot be anybody else's playground. That's absolutely impermissible. And uh, time has come that we as a society have zero tolerance to sexual harassment. uh, I also want to touch here briefly that in India we have one of the most incredible laws anywhere in the world. Our laws have really kept pace with the problems, with the mischiefs that have happened in the society, and our legal regime is amongst the best. Our court systems, our justice delivery system, our Supreme Court, especially the constitutional courts, Supreme Court, high courts, have commanded a lot of respect in the world on their professionalism, on their impartiality, on their integrity. But the problem really in India is of implementation. The problem really is of that chalta hai attitude of um, of accepting just about everything. That is an attitude that needs to change. The laws are there. Laws have been there. Now sexual harassment is an offense even under the IPC. This, of course, is a special act for workplaces, but now sexual offense, after the Nirbhaya amendments came, new offenses were added in the IPC to include eve teasing, voyeurism, stalking, sexual harassment, acid throwing. All of these were not existing as separate offenses. They were all included in the IPC. And very interestingly, IPC also prescribes a smaller punishment to start with for the first time offender, and if the offense is repeated, then the second time offender gets a higher punishment. That is the scheme of IPC on these sexual offenses. That is how we need to take it as a society also, and we need to have zero tolerance for all of these sexual offenses against women. I must also tell you that this is not something that is specific just to India. This is something that exists across the world. We saw that last year we saw Me Too movement gained momentum. It started in the West. It started in the most developed democracy, and then the way it gained momentum across the world. It was clear that these are stories which transcend the geographies, which transcend the level of development or the level of enlightenment that a society or a democracy may have, the level of the liberty or equity or equality that that society may claim to enjoy. These gender related issues are uncanny in their resemblance, and they actually transcend boundaries. They transcend geographies and different jurisdictions. United Nations recognizes sexual offenses against women or violence against women to be a result of unequal power equation for centuries between men and women. So sexual harassment also has its root is in that unequal power equation between men and women for centuries, and that is how it is understood world over. So we need not. It is sometimes it is important for us to understand the world perspective. Only then we can appreciate the Indian perspective and our home perspective better. But the battle has to be fought at every level, and the battle has to start from our homes and our workplaces, our classrooms, our streets and our colonies. Thank you very much for hearing me out. These are some of my thoughts. Like I promised, I didn't want to speak too much. Let's make it interactive now. Let's hear what my younger colleagues have to say.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an enlightening address. Indeed, all the information shared by you is of high importance. As we know, ignorance of facts can be an excuse, but ignorance of law cannot be. Many of you might not have been aware of the laws or the information that you have told us, but now after the session, we are well aware of them. So before we move on to the question and answer section of our webinar, I want all the participants to know that you all can raise your hand and our admin will unmute you and then you can ask your questions. But before that, I would like to ask one question on behalf of myself. That is about how do you see these sexual harassment laws or the rape laws? These laws have the word women in that. How do you, what do you think that about the general neutrality of these laws? Since men can also face sexual harassment in workplaces, and men also can be raped, and not only so, is it just because that India as a country is not understanding the concept about men being sexually harassed or raped, or is it something that the legislators never intended to do? What is your take on this?
So, Daman, this debate has also started now in India. There is a raging debate about making some of these laws gender neutral. And while it is great to have the debate, but I think, as a student of law, I feel that it is always important to understand the perspective where we have to apply it, or the perspective, the factual foundation always is very important. Whenever we are talking about judgments also, whenever we cite ratios from Supreme Court judgments, it cannot be divorced from the facts that were before the court. You have to appreciate the facts that were before the court and then only understand the ratio of it. See, in an ideal world, we should certainly have all of these laws should be gender neutral. There is no reason in an ideal, perfect world to have these laws, only to protect one gender. But we have to understand one thing: the equality does not mean blind equal treatment of all. Equality means equal treatment of equals. In fact, equality article requires classification. It mandates that where people are unequals for a particular measure, for a particular thing that you are proposing to do for them, then, and if you treat them equally, if you're treating two classes of unequal people equally, then you are actually perpetrating inequality. Because to give you a small example, I mean, if you have a fish, a bird and a crocodile, and you say, all three of you, I'm teaching you this, I'm teaching you how to fly, and now I'm going to take your examination on, and let's see who can fly farthest. A crocodile and a fish will always think that they fail at it. I mean, a crocodile will think that I'm a failure in life, and a fish would have lost her life trying to fly only. So you can't, because they are they are all animals, but for the test of flying, they are unequals. So what you are seeking to do with them, if you treat them as equals at there, then you have to. That is the whole concept of equality. I just give you a very generic example, which is an example given for our education system. That our education system today is asking if the fishes and the crocodiles and the birds, everyone to show that they can fly, whereas everyone need not fly. Anyways, another time for that. But The point is, women have been subjected to thousands of years of inequality. They have been, how rape was understood in the 18th century. Women were considered as a property of the man. They were considered as a chattel of the men. So rape was understood to be a crime against property of the father if the woman was unmarried, and it was taken as an offense against the property of a man if the woman was married. Right of self-determination of woman was absent. Just 2 years back, adultery has been declared to be unconstitutional by Supreme Court. Adultery, by definition in IPC, said that if a man has sexual intercourse or sexual relationship with a woman, with another man's wife, without the consent or connivance of that man. I mean, look at that. Look at the absurdity. So if you have the consent or connivance of the husband, then you can have that sexual intercourse with his wife. It's not an offense. But if you don't have the consent or connivance of the husband, so it has been a changing world. 100 years back, we have, world has celebrated, just I think 2 years back, world has celebrated the 100 years of women getting right of vote. Universal adult franchise was not available to women. Slaves got the right of vote before women got. The struggle has been that much. So you have to appreciate that, and look at the heartlands. Yes, sexual harassment is happening to men at many places. Yes, power equations are changing slowly, but in how many places? Still, in the majority of the heartlands, I mean, still you see all cases of bride burning. It is only daughter-in-laws who get burned. Why? Mother-in-laws are also there. Sister-in-laws are also, I mean, sisters of the house also live there. Why none of them get burnt in bride burning? Why pesticides are being given only to the brides of the house? These are questions that we need to ask ourselves. This is still happening in the society. I would love to have this power equation change. I would love to have, more women as perpetrators of these offenses rather than just being victims. But we need to, till we get there, or we get into an ideal world where there is no offense at all. I don't know if we can get there, but till we get there, we have to, it's like the flight of stairs. We can't jump to the terrace. Though we know we have to get to the terrace, that is the ideal stage that we have to be in. But we can't jump to the terrace without going through the step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc.
Thank you so much for the answer, ma'am. Now, I request all the participants that you can unmute yourself. You can raise your hand, and our admin will unmute you, so you can ask a question to ma'am directly. We are waiting 2 minutes for this.
Hello, madam. I have one query, madam. In case of sexual harassment, if the boss of that particular lady treated as the whistleblower and he raised the complaint on say of that particular victim or that particular girl who has been harassed sexually by her boss, so what is the immunity to the whistleblower?
See, the whistleblower really does not have any cause to worry. If there is immunity to whistleblower is not in the Sexual Harassment Act. The immunity to I mean, if he is, any malified action is taken against him for raising that issue, then he has to deal with it, in the general contours of malified. It is not like a whistleblower will be protected here. This is for aggrieved women. If you see this act, the act of sexual, prevention of sexual harassment of women at workplace, the core of this is the aggrieved woman. and she alone has a protection in this act.
All right. Thank you very much.
Participants can unmute themselves and ask the questions right now.
One more question, madam. So if this kind of whistleblower come forward, and if he is not getting any kind of security at workplace only because he is the whistleblower, so in that case there is no any provision in the law itself, right, as you said. But madam,
Not
in
in
that
this act. Not in this act of 2013.
yes, so the persons may not come forward, and that aggrieved woman, if she doesn't have any daring to come forward, then this will keep going on, madam. In that case, there is any remedy?
No, see, duties of the employer are prescribed in Chapter 6 of this Act. It does not specifically protect a whistleblower, but actually, rather more than that, you will need people to come forward and give evidence in the workplace. And, so therefore, this Chapter 6 prescribes that what should be the duties of the employer. When an inquiry is going on, so there is provision for making sure that the person who is against whom the offense has been alleged, sexual harassment has been alleged, he should be removed from that place. He should be removed from that place because that woman would be there, and any evidence or any witnesses that would be required would be there. So there are duties of the employer to ensure that assist in securing the attendance, etc., of the witnesses before the internal complaints committee. You are aware that internal complaints committee is a permanent mechanism under this act, and it is required to be so in all workplaces. And that internal complaints committee must consist of at least one half of women, and it should be headed by a woman also. So the internal complaints committee, while it is inquiring, investigating into the allegations, then the employer has to have duties to assist the internal complaints committee in all manners. So directly whistleblower does not have a safeguard in this act, but otherwise the duties that are there for the employer that ensure that the work environment continues to remain conducive for that inquiry to go on without, because usually you are right. If the perpetrator is somebody who's in a position of authority, who is higher in the chain of command. So if he continues, I mean, if the victim or the other witnesses continue to report to him, then it is very difficult for them to testify against him.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I got satisfied. Thank you.
We have the final 5 minutes of the session, so if anyone has the questions, please come forward right now, since that is going to be the last question.
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is with respect to the Aruna Shonba case. Ma'am, the accused was sentenced for 14 years, and Aruna Shonbag, she was in a vegetative state for 42 years. Ma'am, shouldn't the punishment should be as rigorous as the crime, as brutal the crime had been? Because later on, the accused denied of having convicted, being convicted wrongly, and also claimed that he had not assaulted her. But the victim, she had to suffer so much, and the punishment that he was given was very disproportionate as the crime, in accordance with the crime. So shouldn't the punishment be more rigorous?
You're right, Gautami, in pointing that out. Aruna Shanbhag was the nurse and a ward boy of her own hospital. Ravaged her in her workplace, and ravaged her to an extent that her oxygen was cut off, while her own hospital really stood up for her and took care of her for all these years, but the perpetrator of the crime uh, uh, did suffer much less as compared to the victim. But Gautami, the punishment theory in the criminal jurisprudence it's not a single theory that governs the sentencing in criminal offenses in India. We are not a eye for an eye or just retributive kind of a punishment nation. We consider ourselves a civilized nation where all five theories, amalgamation of all those five theories form the basis of the sentence that is given, and that all those five theories include retributive, but it includes reformative also. And reformative theory, that is why the quantum of punishment, quantum of sentence is on the basis of that. But the society, the lawmakers, legislators, and the courts all realized the disproportion in this punishment, and therefore after Nirbhaya, if you notice the laws that were amended, the definition of now rape has been amended. The punishment for uh, uh, gang rape has been amended. Punishment of rape with murder has been amended. Punishment of rape leaving the victim into a vegetative state, that also has been amended, and now it prescribes the maximum capital punishment after the Nirbhaya amendment. So those amendments have happened. Of course, Aruna Shanbhag's case was much prior to those amendments. So there the perpetrator got the life that he got, 14 years, and he got away with it. Of course, no, all convicts. I mean, I haven't seen many convicts after undergoing their punishment or after, the offense saying that, owning up to their offense. They don't. Most of the people do say that but then they have gone through the system, they've gone through the process, and they have been convicted. That conviction means that they alone are the perpetrators of those crimes, because India, we have adversarial system in our criminal jurisprudence. We have crime is established beyond the shadow of reasonable doubt, only then the person is sent for punishment. It is not like Europe that you have, inquisitorial system. It's not preponderance of probability like in many European countries. So no matter what he says, he is a convict, he has undergone the punishment. Of course, the punishment of that time was lesser, so he got away with it. But the laws are also evolving. Dhaman mentioned about gender neutral sexual laws. For the first time, India got a gender neutral sexual law was in 2012, when POXO was brought into force. So Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, which is POXO, was brought into force in 2012, and that was for the first time that sexual offences, and it divides into three forms. It includes sexual harassment, it includes sexual offences, and aggravated sexual offences. All these three are part of POXO, and it is of course for protecting children. But earlier for children, it was not gender neutral. It's only after coming of POXO that now for children at least it has become gender neutral. So the laws are progressing. Let's see how it goes forward.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Hello,
With that
ma'am.
being a fine, all right, we have one more question. Please keep it short.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Ma'am, many times the men are implicated falsely by women by using these laws. So how do you see, ma'am, as our former Chief Justice was also implicated by false claim by a woman?
You're right, Saravjit ji. False claims have also become quite rampant in our society, and so much so that Supreme Court in its judgments have taken cognizance of the fact that dowry laws and these matrimonial cruelty laws have become now one of the most misused laws in the country. Similar is the case with sexual offenses, where we are seeing that live-in people who are in live-in relationships, people who are in long-term relationships, after those relationships go bad, the allegations of rape are made very lightly or sundry. This is precisely the reason why judiciary is there. This is why the allegation, when it is made at the time of the FIR, that has to go through the test of trial, and that is why it is the judiciary burden of removing the fat from the grain, and that burden judiciary has to fulfill. They alone can fulfill. In fact, because there are so many delays in our system, the problems are getting more highlighted, that we feel that justice is not being done to people who are brought in false cases, because it is taking too much time for people to come out unscathed from false cases. But for that, we need to have a faster mechanism of system, but the system is in place. And misuse can be there of any law. Even murder laws are misused in the country. Even the best of the environmental laws are misused in our country. In everywhere in the world, it's not just in our country. The misuse of laws is there because you can't take away the element of deviant behavior from human psychology. So till humans are capable of a deviant behavior, they will be capable of misusing the best of the resources that are available. But you can't throw out the resources because they are capable of being misused. You have to find that will be like throwing the baby out with the bath water. If you want the bath water changed, you change the bath water. You don't throw the baby out with the bath water. So we have to be cautious not to throw out the baby with the bath water, but we have to equally be cautious to make sure that our systems become faster, so that people who are, malicious prosecution is an actionable, is a crime in the IPC. But I must also confess that in my 22 years of experience as a lawyer, I have not seen a single case of malicious prosecution, because people who are who are roped in by fallacious cases, by the end of getting out of that fallacious case, they are so tired of the system that they don't want to go back to the system to vindicate their stand or vindicate their rights. That is a problem of delay in the systems. That's not a problem of bad laws.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With that being a final question, now I would like to conclude the first of our 4 sessions today. I extend my heartiest gratitude on behalf of Think India to Aishwarya ma'am for engaging with us on this particular webinar. Now, I would also like to welcome.
1 minute, Damanji, before I go.
Yes, ma'am.
I must apologize to my friend. I see her here and the participants. My dear friend Archana Pathak Dave. She was very kind to switch her time with me. Otherwise, this was her time slot, and she was supposed to open this seminar with you. But she's a wonderful friend of mine and a very, very competent lawyer of the Supreme Court. She's a very distinguished counsel. Her standing, as her growth and her standing, I have witnessed. I have been a party to, and I have seen, the extreme level of dedication, integrity, and humility that she brings to her work. And I think she's chosen a very correct person for talking about the journey of law and women. And while I leave you, I welcome my friend, and I thank all of you for having me here this morning. And thank you, Archana ji, for allowing me to switch time with you. Enjoy your interaction.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
As introduced by Aishwarya ma'am herself, Archana Pathak Dave is an advocate and the additional solicitor general is an advocate